I noticed the first inconsistency on a Tuesday in March, and I did not say anything because saying something too early ruins everything. I noticed the way he checked his phone when he thought I was not looking, the way his expression changed when a particular name came across the screen, the way he would excuse himself from the room and close the door behind him, and speak in a voice that was just slightly different than the voice he used with me. Softer somehow, more careful. I noticed and I filed it away in the place where I keep information that I am not yet ready to act on, because acting too early means reacting emotionally, and reacting emotionally means making mistakes. And I have spent 39 years learning not to make mistakes when it matters. My name is Amanda, and I have been married to Richard for 7 years. We live in Atlanta, Georgia, in a neighborhood called Virginia Highland, in a house that we renovated together over the course of 3 years, removing walls and installing new plumbing and choosing paint colors, and having the kind of conversations that couples have when they are building something together. Richard is a financial advisor. I am a project manager for a construction firm. We do not have children by choice. We have a dog named Maverick, who is 11 years old, and who spends most of his time on the couch sleeping and occasionally waking up to eat or walk around the block. Our life has been stable and predictable, and I had believed it was also honest until the Tuesday in March, when I noticed the phone checking, and the soft voice and the closed door, and I understood that something had shifted. I did not confront Richard that evening. I did not call my sister. I did not tell my best friend. I did not do anything except go about my day exactly as I had been going about it before I noticed the inconsistency, and I thought about what it might mean and what I needed to do about it. By Wednesday, I had decided on a course of action, and that course of action was to say nothing, to notice everything, and to build a complete picture of what was happening before I said a single word to Richard about what I had observed. I have never believed in confronting people without information. I have spent my career in construction managing teams and managing budgets and managing projects that cost significant amounts of money and could not afford mistakes. And I have learned from that experience that you do not accuse someone of something unless you are absolutely certain of the facts, because if you are wrong and you accuse them, you lose credibility. And if you are right but you do not have enough evidence, they will simply deny it and continue doing what they are doing. I decided to gather evidence. I started by paying attention. I paid attention to when Richard checked his phone and what time of day it was, and what his facial expression was when he checked it. I paid attention to how many times he went to the bathroom to take calls or send messages. I paid attention to the days he said he was working late and did not come home until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I paid attention to the weekends when he said he needed to go to the office to catch up on work, but was gone for 3 or 4 hours, and came back looking refreshed in a way that catching up on work at the office does not typically make a person look. I paid attention to the times he said he was meeting a client for lunch, and came back from lunch in a completely different mood than when he left, lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. I did not confront him. I simply noticed, and I wrote it down in a notebook that I kept in my office at work where Richard would never see it. I wrote down the dates and the times and the behaviors I had observed, and I started to build a timeline of when these behaviors were most frequent, what times of day he was most likely to receive the calls or the messages that changed his expression, how often it was happening. By the end of March, I had pages of observations. By the middle of April, I had narrowed it down to a pattern. By the first week of May, I knew exactly what was happening, and I was ready to find the proof that would confirm what I already knew. I did something that I am not proud of, but that I do not regret, which is that I asked Richard for the password to his work email. I told him I needed it because I was going to be out of town for a work conference for 4 days, and I wanted to be able to reach him about a project emergency if one arose. He gave me the password without hesitation because Richard did not believe I would actually use it. He believed that when people ask for passwords, they are asking for insurance rather than actually planning to go through someone's private correspondence. He was wrong. I waited until he was asleep, and I opened his work email, and I searched for the name that kept coming up on his phone, the name of the woman who was texting him at all hours, the woman whose name I had seen flash across his screen 100 times in the past 2 months. Her name was Sarah. I found hundreds of emails between Richard and Sarah going back 6 months. I read every single one. I sat at my desk in my home office while my husband slept in the bedroom upstairs, and I read messages in which Richard told Sarah that he loved her, that he had never felt this way before, that he was trying to figure out how to manage his marriage so that he could be with her, that he was sorry for misleading her, but that leaving me was complicated because of the house and the finances and the years we had invested in the relationship, but that he was working on it and that he was going to leave me. I did not sleep that night. I sat and read and I thought and I made a list of what I needed to do, and the list looked like this. 1. Screenshot every email and save them to a flash drive that I would keep hidden. 2. Hire an attorney without Richard knowing. 3. Gather any additional documentation I might need. 4. Figure out what I actually wanted to come out of this situation. And 5. Plan the exact moment and the exact way that I would tell Richard what I knew. By the time Richard woke up the next morning, I had already taken screenshots of every email I had found and had saved them to a flash drive that I had hidden in a book on my shelf at work. I had called an attorney named James and had scheduled a consultation for the following day. I had made a list of accounts that Richard had that I needed to understand better. I had thought very carefully about what I wanted, which was not to save the marriage. I knew the marriage was over the moment I read those emails, but I wanted to make sure that when it ended, I was in control of how it ended, and not Richard and not Sarah, and certainly not some version of Richard's narrative that made him the victim of circumstances beyond his control. I went about my day. I made coffee. I kissed Richard on the cheek when he came downstairs. I asked him about his day. I was pleasant and engaged and completely normal, and Richard had no idea that everything had changed. I was not angry. Anger clouds judgment, and I needed my judgment to be clear. I was not hurt. Not yet. The hurt would come later, when I had the time and the emotional space to feel it properly, but right now I needed to be strategic, and strategy requires a cool head and a clear plan. Richard went to work, and I went to work, and at noon I went to meet with James, my attorney, at his office downtown. I brought the flash drive with all the screenshots, and I showed him the emails, and he looked at them, and he said, "You have done my job for me, already." And I said I have been doing project management for 15 years. I know what documentation looks like. James explained to me what my options were. He explained that in Georgia I could file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, and that infidelity was a factor that could influence the division of assets and potentially the other financial arrangements. He explained that I could expect the divorce to move relatively quickly if Richard did not contest it, but that he probably would contest it if he was trying to manage his liability. He explained that I had a strong position because I had documentary evidence of the infidelity, and because I owned the house partially and had financial assets of my own. I said, I need you to be honest with me. Do I have a strong enough case that I will come out of this okay? And James said, yes, you do. You have very clear evidence of infidelity. You have financial documentation. You own the house. You have your own income. You are not dependent on Richard. You are in a very strong position. I said, when do I tell him? And James said, that is your decision. But my recommendation is that you wait until you have filed, because if you tell him first, he might try to hide assets or move money or do other things to protect himself. So I recommend you file first, and then let him know what is happening when the papers arrive. I went back to work and I thought about what James had said, and I decided he was right. I decided that I would let Richard continue thinking that everything was normal until the moment when the divorce papers arrived. And then I would finally speak and tell him what I had known for weeks. I went home that evening, and I made dinner, and I had a glass of wine, and I sat across from Richard, and I watched him eat. And I thought about the fact that he was sitting at my table in my house eating food that I had made while he was in love with another woman and planning to leave me, and I felt nothing except clarity. Over the next 2 weeks, I filed the divorce papers. James prepared them carefully. I explained to him in detail everything I wanted. The house, the division of assets, a settlement amount that would cover my lawyer fees, and leave me in a stable financial position. I wanted this to move quickly. I did not want to be entangled with Richard for years, while lawyers fought over details. I wanted to be done. James said, we can make that happen, but we need Richard to cooperate, and if he wants to fight it, if he wants to contest the infidelity claim or the asset division, we could be in this for a while. I said he is not going to fight it, and James said, how do you know that? And I said, because once I show him what I know, once I show him the emails, once I show him that I know about Sarah, he is going to want to settle this as quickly as possible because he will not want to have the infidelity made public in court documents. I waited until the papers were officially filed, and then I waited until they were ready to be served. James told me that I could have Richard served at work or at home, and I said I want to do it myself. I want to be the one to give him the papers. James said that is unusual. Most people do not do that. And I said, I am not most people. This is my marriage, and I get to decide how it ends. I went to the office on a Friday afternoon, and I picked up the papers, and I came home, and I waited for Richard to come home from work. He arrived at 6 o'clock, as he always did on Friday. He came through the front door, and he looked tired the way. He always looks tired on Friday after a week of work. And I was sitting on the couch in the living room, with the envelope in my lap, and I said, "Richard, we need to talk." He came and sat down next to me, and he said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "No, everything is not okay. I know about Sarah." The change that happened in his face was extraordinary. It was like watching someone suddenly understand that the game they thought they were winning was actually over and they had lost. He said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I found your emails. 6 months of correspondence with Sarah, emails in which you told her that you loved her and that you were going to leave me. And I have screenshots of all of them. And my attorney has copies. And you can either cooperate with me on this divorce, or we can fight it in court, and I can introduce all of that evidence into the record and make sure that every detail of your infidelity becomes part of the public court documents." Richard said, "Jennifer, I am so sorry." And I said, "My name is Amanda. And do not call me Jennifer, and do not apologize, because your apology does not mean anything to me. I said I have filed for divorce, and here are the papers, and my attorney is prepared to serve you officially, but I am giving you the courtesy of doing it myself, so that you get to hear this from me instead of from a process server. I said you have 7 days to respond to these papers, and I recommend that you cooperate, because if you do not cooperate, I will make sure that this becomes as expensive and as public as possible for you." Richard looked at the envelope, and he looked at me, and he said, "I do not know what to say." And I said, "You do not have to say anything. You had your chance to be honest with me, and you chose to lie instead. So now we are done talking about what you should have done, or what you are sorry for. I said we are going to divide the assets according to what my attorney has proposed. You are going to get the guest house and half of the retirement account, and a settlement amount that will get you started somewhere else. I am going to keep the main house, and I am going to keep the income from the business account, and you are going to pay my attorney fees, because you are the one who created this situation." Richard said, "This is not how I wanted this to go." And I said, "It does not matter how you wanted it to go. You do not get to decide how this ends. I do. Because you are the one who broke the trust, and I am the one who has to decide what happens next. And what I have decided is that we are done, and that you are going to cooperate with me, and that we are going to get this resolved as quickly as possible so that I can move on with my life, and so that you can move on with Sarah, and figure out whether what you have with her is real, or whether it was just the fantasy you created in those emails." Richard did not argue with me that Friday evening. He took the envelope and he looked at me, and he said, "I need to call Sarah." And I said, "You can do whatever you need to do, but you need to move out of this house by tomorrow." And he said, "I will find somewhere to stay tonight, and I will come back tomorrow to get some things." I said, "You have 2 hours to pack a bag, and then I want you gone." And he went upstairs, and I heard him moving around in the bedroom, and I heard him on the phone with someone, and I heard him say, "I have to tell you something." And then his voice got quiet, and I did not listen to the rest, because I did not care about the details of his conversation with Sarah. I only cared that he understood that the conversation we were having was over, and that the life he had been living was over, and that the only thing left was logistics. He left at 8:30 that evening. He drove away in his car with a duffel bag and a suitcase, and I sat on the couch with Maverick, and I thought about the 7 years that I had spent building a life with someone who had apparently spent the last 6 months of those 7 years lying to me and planning to leave me. And I felt the first real wave of emotion wash over me, now that I did not have to maintain the mask anymore. I cried. Not dramatically, but quietly, the kind of crying that comes when you have been holding something in for weeks, and it finally finds an exit. I cried, and I petted Maverick, and I thought about how I had been right not to confront Richard immediately. How that silence and that strategy and that careful documentation had given me control of this situation that I would not have had if I had reacted emotionally the moment I noticed his phone checking on that Tuesday in March. Richard's attorney contacted James on Monday morning. He said Richard wanted to settle quickly and that he was prepared to accept the terms that I had proposed. James said that almost never happens, that usually people fight harder, and I said Richard knows what I have on him, and he knows that if he fights me on this, I will make sure that infidelity is front and center in everything that gets filed with the court. James said you knew he would take that approach, and I said yes, I did. I have been thinking about this for weeks. The divorce was finalized in 4 months, which was extraordinarily fast for a divorce involving property and assets. Richard did not contest anything. He signed the papers. He accepted the settlement. He moved into an apartment in a different part of Atlanta, and he started a new life that I had no part in and did not care to have any part in. I kept the house. I kept the business account. I kept my life exactly as it was, except without Richard in it. I ran into Sarah at a grocery store about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She was standing in the produce section squeezing avocados, and I recognized her from the photographs that had been on Richard's phone. She was younger than me by probably 8 or 9 years. Blonde, pretty in the way that young women are often pretty before life has complicated things. She was holding an avocado and looking at it critically, and she did not see me, and I thought about whether I should say something to her, and I decided I should not, because whatever happened between Richard and Sarah was not my problem anymore, and I did not care to make it my problem by involving myself. But then I saw her a week later at the same store, and then I saw her a month later at a coffee shop, and I realized that our paths in Atlanta were intersecting. And I could either let that be coincidence, or I could engineer a conversation. And I decided to engineer a conversation because I thought Sarah deserved to know something about the man she was with, and I thought it was unlikely that Richard had told her the truth about his marriage. I approached her at the coffee shop. I said, "Sarah, I am Amanda, Richard's ex-wife, and I wonder if you have a minute to talk." She went pale and she said, "I do not think that is a good idea, and I said, "I am not here to cause problems. I just want to tell you something about the man you are with, and then you never have to see me again if you do not want to." She looked like she was going to leave, and then she sat down across from me. And I said, "I want you to know that Richard told me in the emails that he wrote to you that he was unhappy in his marriage and that he was trying to get out of it. But what he did not tell you was that the entire time he was writing you those emails, he was still going to bed with me every single night, that he was still building a house with me, that he was still living a life with me and lying about it. And I think you should understand what kind of person that makes him, and what that means for whatever future you think you are building with him." Sarah said, "I do not know what you are talking about." And I said, "Yes, you do. You were the person he was emailing. You were the person he told that he loved you. You were the woman he was planning to leave me for. And now that he has left me, you should know that the promises he made to you while he was married to me might not be any more reliable than the promises he made to me while he was with you." Sarah stood up and said, "I love Richard and I trust him, and I do not care what you have to say," and she left. I sat in the coffee shop and I drank my coffee, and I thought about the fact that Sarah had to learn her own lessons about Richard the same way I had to learn mine, through experience and disappointment, and the slow understanding that the person you believe you are with is not actually the person you thought they were. I did not see Sarah again after that. I assume they stayed together or broke up or worked things out or did not. I genuinely did not care because Richard was no longer my problem, and whatever Sarah experienced in her relationship with him was her own journey to take. I focused on rebuilding my life. I focused on my job. I focused on renovating the house more completely now that it was just my vision and my choices and nobody else's compromises. I made myself a life that was solid and real and built on honesty instead of deception. The thing I want people to understand about what I did is that it was not impulsive and it was not reactive and it was not based on emotion. It was strategic. It was planned. It was executed with precision, and it worked because I did not confront Richard until I was completely certain of the facts and completely prepared for the consequences. I did not yell at him. I did not cry in front of him. I did not give him the opportunity to explain or to apologize or to ask me to give him another chance because I had already made my decision about what I wanted, and it did not involve him. I think a lot of women are taught that confrontation is the right response to betrayal, that you are supposed to feel things intensely and express them loudly and demand answers and cry and rage and make the other person understand the full extent of what they have done to you. And maybe for some people that is the right approach, but I learned something different. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet and notice everything and build your case and then make your move when you are completely ready and when the other person has no ammunition left to defend themselves with. I learned that silence can be a weapon and strategy can be more powerful than emotion, and that the people who underestimate you because you appear calm and collected are the ones who are most likely to be surprised when you move. If you are in a situation where you suspect something is wrong, where you have noticed inconsistencies that you are trying to rationalize or explain away, where you have a feeling that something is not right, even though the person you are with keeps telling you that everything is fine, I want you to know that your instinct is probably correct and that you do not have to confront it
Metadata
immediately. You do not have
loving
to demand answers right away. You do not have to give the other person the chance to prepare their defense or construct a narrative that protects them. You can be
business
strategic, you can gather information,
Ladder
you can
page
build a case, you can move when you are ready, and when you have everything you need to protect yourself. And I want you to know that if you are struggling with the idea of being silent when you want to
check
scream, that is okay. That is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. That is a sign that you are capable of controlling your emotional response enough to think clearly about what you
status
want and how to get
metadata
it. That is a sign that you
reactive
understand the difference between reaction and
created
strategy and that you are choosing strategy because strategy wins and
check
emotion,
total views
however
the
justified it is, does not
14
always. One last
100%
thing.
upward
I want you to
viewers
understand that what happened to me
views
could have
के
happened
viewers की
differently.
कीमत लगा
Richard could have hidden more. Richard could have been smarter about what he was doing. Richard could have
compare
deleted his
8
emails more
January to
carefully,
9
or used a
January
different phone, or
viewers
done any number of things that
100%
would have made
post
him harder to
graph
catch. What allowed me to catch him was not magic. It was attention and
हाँ जी लग
documentation and
गया
patience, and the willingness to play the long game instead of demanding immediate gratification. If you learn how to do those things, if you learn how to be patient and strategic and quiet when you need to be, you will
दो
be prepared for whatever comes next.
आई
Leave
कैट
me a comment and tell me if you think I did the right thing, if I should have confronted Richard earlier, if my silence was as
फास्ट
powerful as I believed it
ये
was,
बाकी
or
कितनी
if I
है
am
पोस्ट
fooling
अभी
myself
पास
about
का
that.
दो एक
Tell
ही
me
रह
whether
गई
you would have the strength to stay quiet,
7
if you
मिनट ज़्यादा
discovered what
गई
I
लेकिन
discovered,
ये
or whether the
डेटा भी ले रही है
confrontation would come immediately. I genuinely want to know because I have thought about this every day since it happened, and I still wonder sometimes if I made the right choice or if I just made a choice that was right for me, because it was the only choice I was capable of making at that time. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them belongs to a woman who had to choose between her emotions and her strategy, and had to
चलो
live with the consequences of that
हाई
choice. I will
ऑडियंस
see you in the next one.
लाइक